It's the Harris Football Podcast with your host, Christopher Harris.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for listening. I'm Chris Harris. This is our show, Harris Football Podcast. Wanted to remind you that you can follow us on Twitter at Harris Football. You can use the hashtag HeyHarris to give us some feedback. Tell us how wonderful we are. You can also send an email, heyharris@harrisfootball.com. And also at harrisfootball.com, I've got some player videos for you, little bite-sized morsels of me talking about interesting players for the upcoming season and what we might be thinking of doing with them for our fantasy draft strategy, so please check that out. It is August. It is exciting. Training camps are underway. The 2015 season is nearly upon us. I can't wait. Hey, let's get to today's show, shall we?
Today's kickoff.
Thank you, Amber. So first we're going to tackle a little bit of training camp news in honor of camps being open. I'm going to spend time after that going through my top 20 wide receivers for 2015. This is the first part of our early wide receiver draft preview for strategy. You can always find my rankings at harrisfootball.com. Hey, we've got a music digression for you today I think you're going to enjoy. And then we're going to have some DFS, Daily Fantasy Sports, strategy talk. So you DFS fans will want to stay tuned. Here we go.
Injury news.
Fortunately, as of my recording, there have been no massive fantasy stories that have been related to training camp injuries, but there are a few problems, and it seems like mostly they're problems with players that I've been touting so far this summer, which is not great news for my ranks. I haven't made any changes in those ranks just yet, but we'll have to see how these injuries shake out. David Cobb, who I talked about, the Titans running back, rookie, I liked him in my running back preview last week. He broke a finger in training camp on Saturday. We'll have to see how far that sets him back. Breshad Perriman, someone on Twitter who I've been talking about as a potential sleeper, another rookie, bruised a knee. At this point, just sitting out a few practices, but for rookies, every practice matters. Kevin White, another rookie, shin injury, plus apparently showed up to camp out of shape. Don't you just love it when your favorite rookie does that? Apparently he's missed a few practices. Duke Johnson, another rookie, a hamstring injury on Saturday. He's missing practices. The Browns are having a hard time keeping running backs healthy in their training camp so far. Devin Smith, rookie for the Jets, much more serious injury, although a player probably because of the quarterback situation with the Jets. We weren't all that interested in Devin Smith for redraft leagues, but he broke ribs, he punctured a lung, he's out 4 to 6 weeks. Any redraft appeal that he might have had is fairly gone. And Martavis Bryant, someone who climbed my ranks over the past few weeks, wide receiver for the Steelers entering his second year. He has an elbow problem, an infection of some kind, out 7 to 10 days. And that brings me to something I want you to think about when you're reading news about these training camps, kind of the difference between something that's news and not news. The fact that Martavis Bryant is missing practices with an elbow issue, that's news. That's worth watching. I haven't changed Bryant's rank just yet. After all, we're still, 5 or 6 weeks away from the season starting. There's plenty of time for him to come back, but I'm going to have my eye on it. That's a story. When Ben Roethlisberger tells the media that he thinks Marcus Wheaton is his wide receiver breakout candidate, that's not a story. I want you to ignore that kind of thing. We don't really care what the players say. We care what actually happens on the field. And there's a million examples of players who've said, oh, watch this guy, watch that guy, and it never works out. I will watch to see what Marcus Wheaton's reports are like. We'll wait to see what he's like in the preseason. If Bryant stays out, that's a good opportunity for Wheaton, but I'm not going to take Big Ben's word for it. So speaking of wide receivers, let's dig into my top 20 receivers and talk some draft strategy. I'm going to start at the top with 3 wideouts. Antonio Brown, Demaryius Thomas, and Dez Bryant. I have them slightly above the rest of the group. Let's take them one by one. Brown is amazing. He's my number 1 fantasy receiver. He was the best last year. We're talking about a guy who's 5'10", 186 pounds. But he plays outside. Last year, 638 total routes run. Only 107 of those routes were from the slot. He wins with quickness, incredible joystick-like quickness. He has a 33-game streak with at least 50 yards receiving. Antonio Brown's my top receiver. Not a lot of injury concerns. He doesn't fit the traditional mold, but I am still buying Antonio Brown. Demaryius Thomas is next, and he fits the mold. He is a physical specimen, to say the least. He's also got 3 straight years without a missed game, 111 catches last year, 3 straight years of double-digit touchdowns. Yes, in Dynasty, I think Demaryius does suffer just a little bit with the prospect of no Peyton Manning in his immediate future, but not in redraft leagues. I think he's as safe as they come, and he's a first-round pick in all formats. And Dez Bryant, at least 12 touchdowns in 3 straight years, including 16 scores last year. I have him half a step behind Demaryius this season. He doesn't quite have that Demaryius Thomas yardage upside. Thomas has been above 1,400 yards in 3 straight. Dez's career high is 1,382. But we're splitting hairs. They're both great. All 3 of these guys are great. I think they're very defendable as first-round picks. Next for me comes a group of 5. I would say there is a slight separation between that first tier of 3 and this next group of 5, leading it up with Jordy Nelson. I think folks have been surprised to see how high I have Jordy for this season. I have him at number 4 in all formats. He's coming off of hip surgery. I do reserve the right to lower him if he eventually shows side effects, but we've heard that he's running fine to this point. 1,500 yards last year, 13 touchdowns. You see on film he wins at all 3 levels. He can beat you deep, but he's a really good route runner as well. And he has that competitive advantage, Aaron Rodgers. The next 3 guys on my list, they're players who, talent-wise, could very well be number 1 in terms of talent. And really, if they were healthy at all times, would be in competition to be the wide receiver 1 of all wide receiver 1s. But they're 5, 6, and 7 because of their injury problems. First one is Megatron. Missed 5 games the past 2 seasons combined. He was a decoy with injury problems in a few others. He's banged up a lot. I would argue that he's still the most talented wide receiver there is in the entire NFL, but he's 30 in September, and like I said, always seems to be banged up. I feel a little bit gun-shy this year. Next for me, Julio Jones. Unbelievable when he's healthy. He's probably the number 2 most talented receiver in the league, but he missed 11 games a couple seasons ago. He was hobbled late in the year. Last year, his max so far in his career in a season is 10 touchdowns. That can change, certainly. He's unbelievably talented, but Roddy White does take away some of the looks that Julio would get. Another guy who could be number 1 overall. If you believe in his health, he could be the number 1 receiver. A.J. Green, almost identical careers, right, with Julio Jones. He missed 3 games last year, also feels like he's regularly hobbled. And in A.J. Green's case, unlike most of the other guys I've mentioned to this point, I really don't trust the quarterback. I'm not a huge Andy Dalton guy.
Game Film Rewind.
At number 8, I have Odell Beckham. If you project his rookie numbers to 16 games last year, ODB would have had 121 catches, 1,740 yards, and 16 touchdowns, which is clearly number 1 wide receiver territory. Like Antonio Brown, Beckham's smaller. He's 5'11", 198 pounds. Like Brown, he wins on the outside. He has, again, that joystick quality, being able to change to any direction with any step. I rewatched his tape against Richard Sherman this past weekend. By the end of that game, he had Sherman regularly on his heels, not wanting to commit, knowing that if he overcommitted, he was going to get burned. Beckham's hands get all the publicity. His hands are great. We've seen those pregame rituals, and they make for great footage. But what really makes him a stud is his change of direction quickness, which it gets him open all the time. You know, this is a kid who just was open all last year. So it does beg the question, if I like him so much, why not have him higher than number 8? The answer is, I'm a little conservative, and he's only done it once. Let's see how the league adjusts to a player his size. He can succeed, and I'm a believer. Antonio Brown is proof that a player this size can win on the outside. I also think, though, that Beckham seemingly consistently battled hamstring troubles last year and in OTAs this year, so I think there's maybe a bit of underreported injury risk there. Listen, I have him 8th, right? I absolutely love him. He's a number 1 wide receiver for me for fantasy. And frankly, I can't get too harsh if you have him higher.
Can't do it.
Yes, thank you, Iron Mike. So that's probably the end of the wide receivers I feel really good about in the first 2 rounds of standard drafts. I have Alshon Jeffrey at number 9. He's a beast. He's probably maybe half a step slower than the other larger wide receivers I've listed so far. Plus, he has Jay Cutler questions. Randall Cobb is number 10. I think he's legitimately talented and not at all a fluke. He's a really good player. It is kind of tough for me to see 12 touchdowns recurring, mostly out of the slot again this year. I'll round out this third tier with Mike Evans. Looks like a born touchdown maker, but has a rookie quarterback. T.Y. Hilton, breakaway threat, great quarterback, but potential to be a little up and down in the Colts offense that has really good other weapons. And DeAndre Hopkins, not quite the touchdown maker Evans is, but probably a better athlete, but of course has quarterback problems of his own in Houston. So that's my third tier. That kind of rounds out that third tier. Now, I do think there's a drop. I've listed 13 wide receivers. I need to have one of those wide receivers in every format, and 2 of those wide receivers would be fantastic. There are excellent players outside the top 13, no question, but the warts get bigger, and those guys will probably be up and down, and maybe a little too up and down to be fantasy number 1 wide receivers. For me, this next group is going to consist of Deshaun Jackson. You talk about up and down. He's going to win you some weeks, but some weeks he's also going to get you 2 catches for 43 yards. Kelvin Benjamin, awesome, really unexpectedly good rookie season, and his size does make him a touchdown maker, but on tape, his hand problems really feel legit. Emmanuel Sanders probably taking a little bit of a step back with that Broncos offense. It's going to be a Gary Kubiak, maybe a little bit more balanced, and as the number 2 receiver, I think he takes maybe just a little bit of a back step and a back seat to Demaryius Thomas. Sammy Watkins, listen, went back, watched that tape a bunch. I love his ball skills. He was hurt a lot during his rookie year. His ball skills are legit. I would put him, being able to adjust in the air and make a hands catch on par with almost anyone in the league, but the Buffalo quarterback, we've talked about bad quarterback situations. Buffalo is quarterback hell. Number 18 among wide receivers for me is Brandon Cooks. A lot of potential with a lot of turnover in that Saints offense, but of course, we haven't seen him be the focal point of an NFL offense yet. I'm going to skip number 19 for a second and say that Jordan Matthews is number 20 for me. Early reports have him running in Eagles camp, mostly out of the slot again. So once again, you would imagine that as kind of that Marcus Colston big slot receiver who's going to be target rich, he's going to have to make his bones via shorter targets, via volume, and hopefully through touchdowns. So let's go back to number 19. It's probably going to make you a little nauseous. Number 19, I have Keenan Allen.
Counterintuitive opinion of the day.
Yeah, I guess this means I am going right back to Keenan Allen in his third year. He wasn't good in his second year, not at all. And believe me, I'm not 100% positive that he bounces back. I'm also not saying he's anything more than a weak number 2 wide receiver for fantasy here, at draft time. But I go back to that rookie tape. He was open all the time. Last year, maybe there was an injury we don't know about, or it was worse than we know about. Last year, he was essentially a possession receiver as a second-year player after he's not a burner as a rookie, but he was someone who consistently got open beyond 10 yards down the field. I guess this is a case where I'm going to show faith that the skills the players showed 2 years ago will return. I believe he still owns those route running skills, that real slickness that he came into the league with, that he really seemed to lose last year. So I have Allen inside my top 20. I think he bounces back, but I do acknowledge that there's real risk there. So those are my top 20 wide receivers in a standard league. As for point per reception scoring, if you check out my ranks on harrisfootball.com, you'll see a lot of similarity. The very top standard scoring wide receivers are going to get really nice volume, kind of by definition, and be terrific in a point per reception too. That's why 18 of the 20 players I've just talked about are also in my PPR top 20. The 2 guys not in my standard top 20 who are in my PPR top 20 are Julian Edelman for obvious reasons. He's a volume monster. I'm not going to get into the particulars of whether Tom Brady plays a full season just yet and who destroyed whose cell phone. But either way, Edelman is a terrific point per reception security blanket. And my number 20 PPR receiver is Amari Cooper, rookie from Oakland. I don't love Derek Carr. I think there's a chance he takes a big statistical step back this year. But Cooper looks like a volume hog in what otherwise is a pretty underwhelming Oakland wide receiver core. He comes into the league as polished as any prospect in recent memory. Looks like 100+ targets are in his future, and that would make him, conceivably a really interesting point per reception option. Tomorrow will be part 2 of our wide receiver preview. We're going to talk about some wide receivers not inside my top 20, and also we'll talk a little bit about overall wideout strategy. Where do you take receivers relative to other positions? That kind of thing. Up next today, though, we're going to change gears and talk some DFS strategy, specifically some theories on how to maximize your chances of winning the big prizes on sites like FanDuel and DraftKings. First, though,
Harris's Music Digression.
If you listened at all to my old podcast, you know I like and think about music a lot, to the point where I'm getting close to being done with a novel about a rock band. Anyway, something I think is awesome about getting to do my own podcast is getting to ask musicians if I can play their stuff on the show. Today, I want to play part of a song from Quiet Company. I first saw Quiet Company this winter. I used to live in Austin, Texas, and I went down there for the winter this year to avoid the cold. I got to see them at their record release party, and I loved them. You can follow them on Twitter at QuietCompanyTX, and I also hope you'll check out that new record of theirs that I was at the record release party for. The record is called Transgressor. This song is Seven Hells. Again, here's Quiet Company.
Today's guest.
Okay, I've got Craig Clark here. Craig is one of my oldest friends, one of the smartest people I know. He also happens to be a DFS, Daily Fantasy Sports expert. Craig, I thought we would maybe talk a little bit of theory. I don't understand math as well as you do. How are you doing, and thank you for doing this.
No problem. I'm doing good, and I think you understand math plenty.
I guess people who've read what I've written might think that, but I've been faking it out the whole time. You actually have a master's in statistics, so you're a good person to talk to about this stuff. And specifically, we were having a conversation offline, as civilians, you might say, and we were talking about, I think we were talking about you playing the British Open, right, in DFS? You played the British Open, didn't you?
Yeah, and I got Zach Johnson right. I got everything else wrong, but I made money.
Nice. And so we were talking about it, and then I kind of asked the question because I read a lot of DFS experts who say, listen, the way to win the guaranteed prize pools, the GPPs, those $1 million thingamajigs in DFS, is multiple entries. And my question to you that started off our conversation about it was, mathematically speaking, is there validity to that strategy? Because it seems to me that if every entry is kind of statistically independent of each other, then spending twice as much money for twice as much expected value is sort of a straight line if we're talking mathematically.
Yeah, I mean, just straight mathematically, I think it is that way. But when you add your expertise to it, maybe you can make things to go in your advantage.
Okay. So basically, everybody who listens to this podcast and gets unbelievably smart, which is clearly what's going to happen if you subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, which everyone should, if your information is better, basically, you're saying this idea of batching entries into these GPPs has some statistical merit to it.
Yeah, I don't hate it. I mean, there are plenty of entries. For example, in the British Open, people took Rory McIlroy. He didn't play.
Right.
Bubba Watson was a very bad bet for the British Open, and he didn't make the cut.
Right.
When you add your information, you might be very likely will be increasing your expectation across one.
All right. So I should mention actually that Craig and I have played a lot of poker together, and I have to say, of anybody who I play poker with, Craig is probably the only person among our circle of friends who I actually am like, I don't really want to be in this particular hand with Craig because I'm worried.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm worried.
And the rest of our friends should just run.
To be fair, I win probably second most, but I think Craig does win the most when we play cards. All right, so if we're talking about multiple entries, that's kind of the topic that we're trying to get to.
Yeah.
If you're saying basically, I'm a listener of the Harris Football Podcast. I listen to Craig Clark's advice about what players to use for week 1. I have, even if it's only slightly and hard to quantify numerically, I have slightly better information than many of the other people in this pool.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I can't quantify it, it increases my expected return. Does that mean that from a pure math perspective, not from a bank account perspective, but from a pure math perspective, I should be entering the maximum number of entries for every single GPP that I enter?
Yeah, 500. Wow, that's $10,000. It hurts. But I do think,
there's a case to be made for that mathematically.
There is a case to be made for it. I mean, it's really expensive. DraftKings would love it.
Yes, I believe that would be the case because they get a little slice of all those entries. All right, so, clearly we're not advising the listeners of this podcast to invest their life savings every single week in the NFL. And in fact, the odds of any single one of them hitting the $1 million is not very good, although we're saying, if you can increase your odds with better information, you might be in the money a little bit more than the average person will, and that's why multiple entries work well. So let's talk about roster composition of multiple entries.
Okay.
My instinct is to spread them out. I want to have a bunch of different guys. I did this past year. Mathematically, I think you're going to tell me it was stupid, but I would try to get a bigger chance of hitting a home run by not having a big overlap in my DFS entries. That is not good mathematical composition, though, is it?
Well, I don't love it. You're fooling yourself in that you're thinking your entries are independent of each other.
Right.
They're not. You're the same person picking all the entries.
Yes.
You're using the same information to make the decisions.
Okay.
And not only are you choosing players, you are not choosing players.
Yeah.
So very often you will not choose the same player on all your entries, even though you choose different players for your entries. So they're already not independent.
Okay.
So I would pick the players that you have the most happiness in your belly with.
Belly happiness. That's the metric that we're going to start introducing on harrisfootball.com.
Yeah, the most in your gut, you feel the best, that you really like. You want to lock down these guys. These are your guys. If you're only doing one entry, these are your first 3 guys that you start with.
Okay.
Right? And you love them. There's no reason not to put them in all of them. Right? You take 3 or 4 guys. Very often, cost will be part of the equation as to why you pick them.
Yeah.
And you like their price. You like them. Right?
Right.
And I go with them across all your entries and sort of box them in, or box them up as a horse racing fan might do.
Yeah. Tent poles.
Tent poles, yes. So you have these tent poles that you're building all your other entries around, or all your entries around. And what happens then, you will either hit fantastically with these tent poles.
Yeah.
What happened was what you thought would happen. And now you've got, say you entered 20 times, now you've got 20 entries that could really make some money.
Yeah.
and there's a good chance that all 20 entries will make money.
Right.
The converse theory is they don't do well at all. A cold front came in,
right.
An ice storm came in, right?
Yeah.
Your information, you didn't pay attention to the weather, and you end up losing them all, and you're out early. And they're like, what fun is that? I just lost $10,000. or however much you bet.
Right.
And then there's the middling. What happens if they do okay, right? Yeah. I think you're going to do as well with your tent poles doing okay as you would from spreading all your entries around, spreading them out all over a whole bunch of different players.
Okay. I get that. I mean, my gut, my instinct was, when I was doing multiple entries, was to shy away from the all or nothing feeling of it.
It's less fun that way when you lose.
Right. Because when you lose early, you lose everyone. You're done right away. When Odell Beckham, who's on all your teams, gets nothing that week. I guess the mathematical proof that tent polling works is if you believe your information on those players is better, right?
Right. Yeah. You have to have an advantage with the information.
Right.
Not necessarily with how you got it or how you consumed it, but your decisions. You have to have faith in yourself.
Right. And, believe that the information is good. And even good information, as we know from playing commissioner-style fantasy, doesn't always pan out in the frustrating limited sample size of a single NFL game.
Right.
Good information doesn't always work out. But the point is, even if you're giving yourself 52% better information as opposed to the 50% that would be if you were randomly picking players, statistically over time, you should bear out on the positive.
Right. There's a line with your information that makes the expectation above 1 in your favor.
Yeah.
And when that happens, there's no reason not to bet more, basically.
Yeah. But
right?
but to tent pole them. So basically, you don't even have to worry about having good information league wide. You have to worry about having good information on the tent pole players, which that's an argument to tent pole. That's an argument to say, all right, this is my really good stuff. Mm-hmm. Which even the really good stuff sometimes is wrong. Mm-hmm. This brings up something that we were talking about. Let's take the example of Jeremy Hill last year. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Jeremy Hill, Gio Bernard gets hurt, and Hill has played well, but not really gotten a chance to start. Yep. Obviously, the algorithms that create the player salaries haven't caught up yet to how at least the playing time that we think Jeremy Hill's going to get this coming week.
Right. They were set on Tuesday. The information wasn't available until maybe Thursday.
Right. And so Jeremy Hill looks like, I've got good information. And sure, a lot of other people are going to have that information too. Now, my instinct is to not make him one of my tent poles because I think to myself, everyone's going to have him. I need to differentiate myself.
I don't really love that because
You're stupid, Harris.
Yeah, because he's cheap.
Yeah.
You're taking him because he's cheap. He may not be your favorite running back.
Right.
But at that price, he's wonderful. And if he does well, guaranteed he's going to be in the winning entry.
Right.
So if you zig when everybody else is zagging,
right.
you could lose.
Okay. And I guess that's right, because I guess essentially if everybody is zagging to Jeremy Hill and I don't, essentially I'm betting that he's going to have a bad game. You're
specifically betting against him.
Right. And so that's not good strategy. So I think I did that wrong a bunch last year. I did do some tent pole, and I won sometimes. Thank you, Odell Beckham. But I did sometimes try to outsmart on obvious guys. And it sounds like you're saying, especially when the part of the obviousness is good value, i.e., artificially low dollars. Boy, that's a great candidate for a tent pole.
Yeah, I mean, he's awesome because he gives you so much more flexibility to do things with other players. You can pick between two different expensive wide receivers, play them both in different entries. Right. You're not tent polling Des Bryant and Demaryius Thomas together because they're so expensive.
Yeah.
But you get so much more flexibility when you tent pole Jeremy Hill.
Is there a number of players that make the kind of optimal number of tent pole? And the answer is going to be no, because it depends on who you have good information on.
Yeah, there's no great answer to that. Mathematically, I think I like 3 or 4. Okay. It gives you a lot of flexibility. It also allows you to play all the Denver players that you could afford with your tent poles, or all the Philadelphia players that you could afford with your tent poles. It allows you to go for teams that you think might go off when you can afford them.
So if I think the team's going to go off, is there a reason why I wouldn't tent pole all the Broncos that week?
It's really expensive.
Okay, that's why. Okay, I mean, I think I get it. I think, is there a theory that says if I feel like my information is so good that I'm going to tent pole 8 guys in 20 entries and then have the 9th be an array of other players? Or is nobody's information that good?
Well, I don't think anybody's information is truly that good.
Yeah.
You really have to love your 8 players, and that's sort of arbitrary, right? You might really love 7 players, or you might really love 5 players.
Right.
So it's just however you rank your guys when it comes in, I'm locked in on him, and I'm locked in on him.
Right.
And how far you get until you're like, I'm not sure whether I like this or this.
Right.
That's sort of where you hit the...
Yeah.
There's
an elegance to this contention, and I understand now why I've read so much about experts saying, multiple entries, and also, sort of have more faith in the idea of tent polling, and it comes down to creating a market inefficiency with knowledge.
Yes.
And it's, in these GPPs where there's so many entries, there are going to be entries who have players who are out, right, who don't even play that week.
Absolutely. There are going to be some entries that are eliminated before they begin.
Right. And that in and of itself creates the market inefficiency that begs for multiple entries. And so I believe the official position of the Harris Football Podcast is spend all of your money in week 1. It is guaranteed to win.
And if you win, you can play week 2.
Absolutely. All right, Craig. Well, this was great, and I hope you'll come back.
Oh, yeah, this was fun.
Okay, good. You can follow Craig on Twitter at PCClark59. That it's at PCClark59. Thanks, Craig.
Thanks for having me.
So that's our show for today. Tomorrow, again, we will have part 2 of our wide receiver preview. Drew Brooks, my former producer, will be my guest. I think you guys will enjoy that. Thank you very much for listening. It means a lot. I hope you'll rate us on iTunes. It helps here at the beginning of this podcast to help people find it. The well-rated podcasts wind up bubbling to the surface of iTunes. So if you have a few minutes to give us a good rating and maybe write a good review, we'd very much appreciate it. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
The Harris Football Podcast's opening theme is Under the Gun by Apex Manor. The end theme is Tooth and Claw by OU Villain. Subscribe to the Harris Football Podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode.